Look, literally, literally the cocktail napkin. That's how I take notes. This is telling me, well, first of all, we're live. It's 10:58 in the morning. This one is telling me the KPA of the different runs and the associated charge temperatures. And I didn't realize that I took a look at some of the later charge temperatures on the test for the running the little M90 supercharger on the 4.8 liter. But as it got cooler during the night, the starting charge temperature went down and the ending charge temperature went down to 143 degrees. And it started at 85 because it was probably, I don't know, 60 or something, out at night, because sometimes I'm there late at night testing. That's what happens. But today, or this morning anyway, I want to talk about the video that I just posted. If you guys can finally see the dyno results, how much power it made, 537 horsepower. If you haven't gone to watch it, spoiler alert, I already told you, so it's already spoiled. But you get to see what happened. And it was cool that running the way that the motor did before I did the enlarged opening going into the blower and then the bigger LS throttle body, that pushed it up quite a bit, pushed it up about 20 horsepower. So up over the previous run with the stock throttle body, which the stock throttle body was fine, but I didn't like it because it didn't have an IAC or a TPS on it. So I want to have those hooked up. And the harness is we're using an LS harness, obviously, because it's a 4.8 liter. So we're using that harness for the Holly to do all the tuning. And that harness obviously has plugs for an LS throttle body. So it just made sense to do that. And then once I decided, well, I could put a stock one on there, and that's a little bit more, or I could put a much bigger than stock one on there, a 92 millimeter. And then as I was porting, I'm like, man, it seems like I'm never going to get there. What I want to do is find out if I can I'm going to talk to the guys at Jokers and see if I can send them the housing, and then if they can disassemble the blower and put the housing on a mill and just mill straight in and just do a 92 millimeter bore basically all the way through that, and then do all their porting. I'll see if that's possible. If not, Mahovitz probably can do that over at AccuFab. That would be much better than me trying to port the whole thing out. It doesn't make sense. And the bore would be nice and straight and, consistent and smooth and fancy. And then I wouldn't have chips all over me and stuff. It would be better if I disassembled the blower, that I could put the vacuum back behind it and could draw all this stuff in. That would obviously make life a lot easier, but it's still, guys that are porting know what porting is. It's messy. You got to keep dipping the thing. And I keep dipping it in the transmission fluid to, keep the bit cooled off and all of that stuff, all of the stuff that happens when you go, when you're doing porting. But the porting definitely worked well, and the bigger throttle body worked well, so we can enlarge that, and more airflow into the blower, as we know, equals more power out, which is good. So the boost did come up a little bit. The interesting thing when you're talking about boost, and this is why I wrote these notes on my little cocktail napkin here, you can see, is because the people want to know, well, how much boost did it run? Well, how much boost did it run where? Because the boost isn't consistent all the way through. With this Roots blower, it's not too bad. It's fairly consistent. But for instance, I'll give you an idea in the next video that's coming up. We talk about individually what happened when we put the camshaft on, what happened when we did the headers, what happened when we did the cylinder heads, what happened when we did the raised entry and stuff. And we go over all that. But one of the things you need to look at, particularly when we did the camshaft, when we went from the Truck Norris cam, which is a fairly, mild cam, good kind of daily driver, and makes good power on the 4.8. But we went from that to the hot rod cam, which is quite a bit bigger and was not designed for a 4.8, and not designed for cathedral port, not designed for an M90 supercharger. It wasn't designed for any of that. And yet it works the way that camshafts normally work. It made more power when we tested it NA on the 5.3. It would make more power if we tested it NA on the 4.8, and it made more power when we tested it with the M90 supercharger. But what happens when you increase the power output of the naturally aspirated motor when you have a supercharger on it? What happens to that? Well, the boost comes down. So if you had a consistent boost curve to begin with, which we didn't totally have, But if you make the thing more efficient with the camshaft on the top end, what happens is you have a falling boost curve. So when somebody says, well, what are you running? Well, the peak boost might be the same. In fact, what happened also on the other end of the scale when we're adding the blower, and this is all stuff we'll go over in the video, but when we change the camshaft, a bigger camshaft does, typically makes less power down low and more power at the top. Well, the reverse thing happens with the boost supplied by the blower. So if you had a consistent boost curve and you put that camshaft in, what happens is, because you're making less power NA down low with the bigger camshaft, now you make more boost. And it's completely contrary to what you think. Well, it's making more boost. It should make more power. No, it's making more boost because it's making less NA power. And that's what happens. And then the reverse happens out at the top end. We're making more NA power. So now we're making less boost. So that you're just, teeter-tottering it a little bit. So it's all really, really cool information for guys that really kind of want to get into understanding what happens with the supercharger, what happens when we make all these modifications. Like when we put the cylinder heads on, we went from the 706 heads to the way better flowing 799 heads. And then we see what happens there. And we see what happens with the camshaft. And like I talk about, the changes in boost for both of those. And then the headers, we went from, and I only did the header test, and we'll go over all that, but I did the header test because we wanted to put a set of headers on that had 802 sensors, so we could do a comparison for, we wanted to see what distribution was. We want to see what all the cylinders were doing individually, not just as groups. Because when we run the air fuel meter, when you run that in the collector of a header, which is normally where it goes, particularly on an NA motor, but also on a supercharged motor like this, you're taking basically you're getting an average of that bank of those 4 cylinders. Well, that gives you an idea. It doesn't tell you what's happening on the other side of the motor on that bank. And then it also doesn't tell you what's happening in the individual cylinders. Lucky for us, on a high ram like that with the same runner lengths, we're supplying the same amount of fuel. It should be fairly even if the airflow is getting evenly distributed to all the cylinders, which doesn't always happen depending on the design of the intake manifold, but also the entry of the intake manifold, how the air is coming in. Sometimes those things affect it. And then also you can change the airfield distribution in the cylinder, which you're reading in the exhaust, based on what's happening with the exhaust. So if you don't have even scavenging from the header itself, you change the amount of air that can be drawn into the cylinder from that scavenging effect, and then you change the power output, and and then ultimately you can change the air fuel coming from that cylinder too. So the header can determine what's happening also to the air fuel in that cylinder. So there's a lot of stuff to consider, and that's why more data on these things is like always a way better way to go. The more information you can have, you're much better off. But the cool thing is that, and I think we're not done yet. Actually, we missed my goal just by a little bit, because what I wanted to do, the number I was thinking when I did this test, when I went down to West Tech, I was hoping maybe we could get to 550. That'd be awesome. Actually, the number that I wanted, and I only picked 550 because I thought, well, I want this supercharged 4.8 to actually make more than the hopped up 5.3 that we did, the NA one. It made 542. So I thought, 550 would be better than that, and that would be nice. I don't know why I said these arbitrary things, because we're car guys, and this is what we do. This is how our mind works. But that's what I wanted to do. And we got close. So, I think that there's more there. And actually, the other thing I want to talk about tonight is, I think part of the reason that we're not there yet is I don't think that this 4.8 is healthy. Unfortunately, the motor is very consistent. So if we make a run and then make another run without any changes, it's consistent. The power stays the same. It doesn't drop. It doesn't increase. It doesn't do anything weird. So it stays the same. But when running this 4.8, what I've been seeing are 2 things that tell me that this thing needs to come apart. One is that we have much lower oil pressure than I would want with this motor, especially when the thing is warmed up. The other thing I'm seeing is there's magic glitter in the oil, which is tells me bearings somewhere are going away. Now, again, we know, having run motors before and having had bearings go away on motors before, because that happens. When that happens and the motor starts going away, what happens is the power will start coming down and down and down. Because what happens is you start getting more and more friction because the bearing's going away. It's not making the power that it should. And then if you keep doing that, eventually the motor will just stop. It'll say, hey, look, I tried to warn you before things got bad. before you should have stopped. Now I'm going to make you stop. And that's what happens. This we're not there with this 4.8. Like I said, it still starts up and runs and turns over, and it's free. But there is bearing material in the oil. So this thing needs to come apart. It might be that I can just take this apart, try to figure out what's going on. I don't think we detonated it. This thing probably has 300 or 400 pulls on it. It's got a lot. Since I put it back together, it was not good to begin with. All the cylinders seem to be there. They all seem to be fairly even, in terms of the power production. So that seems to be okay. But this thing is definitely gonna have to come apart before I run this anymore. I'll have to take a look. I was thinking when the oil pressure was low, it was lower than I wanted it to be last time. And, on these junkyard motors, it seems like running oil through them is the best way to clean them, because there's so much stuff in there. The oil is so black. And then especially we compound that when we run E85, because we get, we get fuel leaking by the cylinders, especially on these when it's probably tired. Certainly in at least one cylinder, and then you get fuel contamination in the oil. So when you drain the oil, you're like, oh yeah, that smells like it's got gas in it. It smells like it's got E85 in it, and because it does. So, draining the oil, you get a lot of the dirt and debris out of it. And then the more oil changes you do, the cleaner the motor seems to get inside. But while doing these oil changes, which this motor has had 3 or 4 of them now, just because I buy the cheap oil at AutoZone and then, run it and then change it before we do the next dyno session. Sometimes we'll just let it go and go and go. Because if you change your oil, you'll drive your motor, 3, 4, 5,000 miles, whatever, and then change the oil. Well, if this thing has 30 or 40 pulls on it, that's not really the equivalent of that. So we leave the oil in and it'll last for a long time. But on this one, I'm like, well, there might be sticks and twigs and rocks in there. So let's try to filter that stuff out and then change the oil and filter, and so we can kind of clean that thing out. But it's definitely gonna have to come apart. I want to take apart we'll have to take the main caps off and the rod caps off and see what's going on. Maybe the crank isn't hurt. Maybe it's okay. Maybe it can be polished. Maybe we put new bearings in it, put a new oil pump in it, and it'll be happy and good to go. Although I would like to find out, obviously, why it's doing this before we continue. The other option is I would just put a smaller cam in the 5.3, and we could run this on the L33 or the LY6, and then continue on with our little adventure on trying to get more out of the blower. My goal is to get 600 from this blower, which would be cool. And I think it's possible with a lot of porting and maybe even more blower speed. So we'll have to see. Let me know what you guys think. If we get 600, let's see what, in fact, that could be our poll for today. Okay. Did we get an LS to make 600 horsepower with a ported version of the junkyard M90 V6 supercharger? That will be our poll for today. Can we put 2? Yeah, we are going to put 2. I don't know if we don't need to do it on a 6-liter. We could do it on anything, but the goal would be to make 1,000 horsepower with 2 of them, and that's also planned. Problem is packaging. Not many vehicles have the room for a high ram with a blower on top of that. Interesting test nonetheless. I agree. You could run this same thing on a low ram because the adapter plate bolts onto anything that's high ramish in design. So the low ram would also work if you have a packaging problem. M90 on a 4.6 non-PI, PI heads and cam. Seems like a good match for the 2-valve. Yeah, it would be from a power standpoint. Because think about it. If you made a 500 horsepower 4.6 2-valve, guys would be pretty happy with that. Just out of curiosity, what was a pulley ratio? It's still the same pulley ratio. We have a 2.6 blower pulley and the stock truck damper from the LS. So that's a 7.5-inch pulley. It's a 18,600 or 700 RPM is where we're at. I was going to do a Gen 3 versus Gen 5 teardown video, then maybe port it. Should be good content for the channel. Beyond that, nothing definitive. M90 adapted to an Edelbrock intake on a 4.6 2-valve for the win. What is I don't even know what is the Edelbrock intake on the 4.6 2-valve? Is it just a carb flange? Edelbrock. .6 liter. Okay. Yeah, just typical single plane kind of deal with an elbow, custom elbow. I don't think you really need a custom elbow. You just need any elbow that will mount the forward throttle body. Holly probably has those, I would imagine. I'd like to see how that intake manifold does. Happy Thanksgiving, yes, to everybody. That will be tomorrow. That would be awesome. Creativity with a hole saw. Saw cures all of that. 600, yeah, I think it can. The problem is that you get up near that level and then the last little bit gets really, really hard to get. I'll just put M1 in it and see what happens. I'd like to see a 5.3 or 5.7 with these heads and a cam with an M90 than an M112. Yeah, an M112 would definitely make more power than this M90. What engine oil detergent product do you use or recommend? Did you show how Edelbrock heads come with a bunch of different pinion heights in the same head? Doesn't matter that much. What do you mean pinion heights? What's a pinion height in a head? Could we get an LS to make 600 horsepower? And maybe the entry could be even bigger. We were thinking about putting a 4-inch tube on it and then just a flange for the 105 millimeter throttle body, if it will accept that. I don't use detergent products. You mean like Tide or Dawn? For the oil, I just buy cheap oil. I just buy 530 stuff that's at the local AutoZone, because these are junkyard motors. They're lucky just to get good oil. Sean, your C6 is running great. Yeah, let me know what happens after you put it on the dyno. That'll be cool. Can't see the pole. I wonder what's going on. Let me. What if I did this? Can you see the pole now that I opened it up? Can you see it now? Can you see it now? I'm impressed by the little M90, and especially after we get this thing flowing, we could put a, let's see. .88. Yeah, if we put a 2.4 pulley on it, it will be 3.1 drive ratio times. Yeah, 6,500 RPM with a 2.4 would be over 20,000 RPM blower speed. So don't know how many pulls it will make at that. And it would be kind of nice to see a blower that I knew was in good shape. Because this one is just one that we got from the wrecking yard. Should have bought a $90 one a couple months ago. I was under the impression it wouldn't supply a 4.3. Well, it will make this kind of power. And a 4.3, since you're starting with the same kind of NA power as the 3800 is, it would be really good for a 4.3. What's the poll question? Could we get an LS to make 600 horsepower with a ported version of the junkyard M90 supercharger? 20,000 plus RPM blower speed probably sounds crazy. Yeah, it does. Although we ran the little AMR 500 pretty high. You have a K-Tech S06, that NA at 647 on the rollers. It'd be cool to find a way to make a cheap way to get close to that at the wheels. I don't know what that is. I mean, I don't understand what this question is or the statement is. Speaking of the AR500, when I won't be putting it on the Sprint because I don't have a Sprint, but I want to put it on that motor. But that motor's a ways away from running on the engine dyno because it doesn't even have an adapter plate yet. Yeah, Nathan, if we feed the blower with a turbo, that it would be easy to make that power, right? Riley, so you restarted your computer and now you can see it? Good. I wonder what the deal is. I wonder why it doesn't show up. So we're looking at a low of 152 kPa and a high of 161, I think, for the various runs. And as I was talking about earlier, not just the high and low, but at different parts, different RPM during the run, because the blower is supplying a different amount of pressure during the run, depending on what modifications we made. No, I wish I still had my Sprint, but unfortunately it was stolen. I just have the motor and various parts for it. So we're down to 77% now on the 600. The GS6 is an expensive. K-Tech conversion is really expensive. Take one of the junkyard blowers. It's cheap on the 5.3. It would be cool. Okay. I can run 2 M90s and go for 1,000. Yes. That's the plan. In fact, I already was sketching out the the design for the dual blower. I may even have questions for the live feed on the design of that. Yeah, an LS7 powered thing is definitely not a cheap date. Z06, yeah. Z06 is crazy. The poll is blank. Try restarting. I guarantee you it's not. I put something in there. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't just put a blank poll up. Hey, here's a poll about nothing that says nothing. So we'll go from top chat. Maybe I'll switch over to live chat and see if that helps with the poll. I don't know why that would change anything. Blank poll. That would be good. Restart your browser. So we've come a long way since Richard telling people that the 3800 is the 3800 supercharger is too small. That's why we keep trying stuff, because we keep learning, even when we think we know everything. Thank you for the M90 video. How about air temperature? Does it wear the engine or the blower? Also, what would be the mods to do for reliable long race, 2-hour, 4-hour track race sessions with the setup? Well, what I would suggest, obviously, is some kind of intercooling. The temperature never went above 176 degrees, I think, was the highest temperature that we saw at around 9 pounds with no intercooler. But if you had an intercooler, then you would be fine. A guy I know on YouTube put 2 M90s on a Ford LTD 302 years ago. Ran pretty good. I used to watch his car run. Also with a guy who had twin turbo 360 Barracuda. Yeah, James, it's not on my end. I mean, obviously other people are seeing it. At least I don't think it is. I don't know why some people would be seeing it and others not. DIY auto tune. I would like for somebody to DIY auto tune. My pull for work when I first joined the stream. Had to join a couple of times. Yeah. So then the interesting thing is, if we put 2 of these M90 superchargers on it, what happens if we put 2 different pulleys on the blower? What happens if you put a 3.8 on one side and then a 2.6 on the other side? Then what happens? Does it get all cattywampus? Supercharge. Just checking some power outputs. You make less power is what happens? Yeah, the total boost would probably just be down. Clear data on my YouTube app. We shall see what happens. Party pulleys for everyone. Yeah. Yeah, the nice thing about having those pulleys, other than the fact we probably would need to change belts when we do this, but it would be good to start out with 2 M90s with the regular 3.8 pulleys. And then, we have 3 2s and 3 5s and 3 O's and down to the 2 6s. I need to get some 2 4s, I think. See, modular pulleys. Oh, no, 2.55 is what they go down to. Modular pulley. And I don't think going from a 2.6 to a 2.55 is really would really be a change that I would want to make. What did I make it? What did I see a 2.4 for? I think that was for, oh, it's an LSA supercharger. Oh yeah, it's for a ZL1. That's a spinny one. What happened to the horn idea with the 2 throttle bodies? I should do that, except that we know that it won't do anything right now because we don't have enough airflow going into the blower. We know that because we put that air horn on there and it didn't do anything. How do you think 2 M90s would do in my motorhome? It would be fine if you could make that all work. You know, obviously you got 2 500, at least 500 horsepower superchargers, so you have the potential to make a lot of power with that. I need to get some headers or something for my ZL1. After that Texas Beat engine fired up, my ZL1 sounded like a Tesla. So quiet. Yeah, but there's something to be said for being stealthy and quiet. Keeping a low profile. The horn would look good, and then we could do what you do is then put 2 turbos on it, and the turbos blowing into those. What's the price for a wrecking yard M90? It depends. On sale weekends, they're anywhere from like $120 down to $70 or $80. What is shaft called with the pulley mounted on it? Could that be machined for a belt to go directly on it? Yeah, but the problem is, Sean, you run into a situation where you don't have any surface area for the belt to actually grab. The better route is just to make a really, really big crank pulley, and that they already have those. Coincidence that I'm currently driving a Grand Prix with a 3.8 liter. Now I want 450 horsepower too. Yeah. I should make an M90 mailbox. I already drew my SketchUp. In fact, I probably would make one. I might make a mock-up template out of like thin sheet metal or something that I can rivet together. Floyd, what vehicle explosion were you talking about? Yeah, Sin City, we talked about that. Where the plan is to do 2 M90s. I think I have 4 total. I think I have 2 of the L67 blowers and then 2 of the Gen 5 blowers. Just picked an aluminum 6 liter with probably 243 heads. Can't figure out what engine is exactly. Doesn't have anything stamped on the block. Do you know what year vehicle it came out of? And it's an aluminum 6 liter? So we know they made an LS2. So an LQ4, not an LQ9, an L76, a 77, a 96, a 98, LC8, LFA, LY6, LZ1. Yeah, if you know what vehicle it came out of, we can tell you which one it is. Guy said an 08 or 07, an Escalade or a Tahoe. It's not an LY6 because that's iron. An L76 then probably. L77 is a Holden one, right? Probably a 76. The Z6 could do stealth too. It has that mild wild switch on the dead pedal that shuts the valves on the stock exhaust. Yeah. $150. That's nice. Yeah, Bill, it should be. An L76 is going to be like an aluminum version of the LY6, right? That's a good score. Yeah, Sean, I wonder how expensive it is to buy the mufflers. Is the valving actually in the muffler on those? L77 is a flex fuel version of the L76. L76 was in the G8 and L77 was in the Caprice. On all cylinders is showing the L77 to be 2011 and up. In Caprice, Holden, VE2, the VF. But this is by no means absolute. And they're showing the L76 in trucks and SUVs. And also in the G8, like a G8. True or false, you shouldn't spray your motor with nitrous under 3,000. It's not a good idea. The reason that it's not a good idea is because you're adding with nitrous, unless you're doing it with a progressive controller. Like if you add 100 horsepower worth of nitrous, below 3,000, you're adding way more than 100 foot. Below 5252, you're adding way more than 100 foot-pounds of torque. So the torque gain that you're adding into the cylinder pressure that you're adding below 3,000 RPM is really, really high and potentially problematic. That being said, lots of people do that. They do it off the line. Live dangerously. I remember when my buddy Ernie was running the dyno at West Tech. I think that this was on a big block Ford that you roll into the dyno and then release it. Well, he rolled into the dyno and then just hit the nitrous and then released it. So it was all the nitrous all the way through. I'm like, that's probably not a good idea. Spraying an NA Barra, they're cheap, but doesn't mean I want to change them all the time. Yeah, you don't. I don't know why you would be spraying it below 3,000 anyway, unless you're doing it, off the line. Have you ever run into a Wizards of Nitrous Revo system? I'm not familiar with that. I have a lot to learn about nitrous before adding it to your C6Z. Nitrous is really pretty easy and actually very forgiving. It's like with Boost, when people get a little greedy and enthusiastic about it. Aren't there situations where people run nitrous as spool turbo? That's what I'm talking about. They would actually use it off the line, and also on NA combinations too. I've run nitrous, endless bottles of nitrous on my street Mustang, and actually run it on road courses. I ran it even on an oval track because we had a triathlon of motorsports, so where we had to run our same vehicle, at the drag strip, and then run it on a road course, and then run it on an oval, a 3/8 banked oval, which was interesting because I had never been on one before I ran the Mustang there. We used the nitrous on all of them. And it works good. It just makes the motor, because it was a 5-liter Mustang, was albeit slightly modified, but on the road course, when the motor was NA, when I went to the Shelby event, it was, allowed me to try to keep up with the 289 hopped up powered GT350s and stuff with my Mustang. It was the great equalizer. The great equalizer. I figure 150 or 200 shot. Yeah, 200 shots getting pretty sporty. You should try it. If you're going to try it way less than those numbers. Start with 100 shot and then see how things go. Especially if you're trying like a simple wet fogger in front of the throttle body, you shouldn't probably go more than that. And unless you get something that's going to guarantee better distribution, it becomes problematic with the LS intake manifolds, the long runner stuff. Let's go ahead and close out our poll at 67% saying yes, thinking so we got like 2/3 versus 1/3 kind of thing on the 600 horsepower. We're a ways away from that. We're 63 horsepower away. So that 63 horsepower would be harder to get than most realize. The one system is completely variable flow, not a pulse system, but it's pricey and they're out of UK. I think that's the guy that I talked to. I think that he sent me information on it. The variable flow thing is not hard to do, but from what I was getting on at least the guy that I was talking to, is the cool thing is he was injecting nitrous in its liquid form down at the port, not down near the valve, because what you want to do is, unfortunately, nitrous, and especially if you're adding nitrous and fuel, it displaces the airflow. And so it limits the amount of nitrous that you can add for any given situation. If you're just adding 100 shot, it doesn't really matter anyways. But if you inject all the nitrous where it's not going to disrupt the airflow, that's actually a better situation. So we're going to end our poll at 67-33, 1/3, 2/3, 1/3, 2/3. It's cool that nitrous was used and perfected, during the war, during the 40s. And so the fact that people are still doing stuff with it and still trying to make systems better 80 years after. That's pretty cool. There are lots of mistakes you can make with nitrous, just like with boost, just like NA, just having too much timing, not enough fuel. Oh, I got jets that go all the way from 100 horsepower to 300 horsepower. Well, obviously, the 300 horsepower one is the way to go. That's not always the case. That is definitely not the case. That's definitely not what it's all about. We got 2 more minutes. World War II flyboys had a ton of fun in the R&D department. I bet that was cool because they tried a lot of stuff. They tried pure oxygen. They tried propylene oxide and hydrazine and all kinds of stuff. But in the end, the nitrous oxide compound seemed to be the best combination of safety and power augmentation and weight and, packaging so that they could have it in the plane. Because obviously, if you're talking about some of these big high horsepower planes, the amount of nitrous that they would have to add to it that is pretty substantial. So then you have to carry that amount. And then how often can you use it? And do you just use it in the emergency situations when you're, in a power dive and you're trying to escape from somebody else, trying to climb to a high ceiling? On the Big Bang motors, did you reuse rod bolts? Yes, they were the original ones. And when we put them back in, we just put them back in according to the factory torquing sequence. Same thing with on the Big Bang motor. Same thing with the main bolts. Just all reused. Just all, is that ideal? Probably not. But you're not going to break the rod bolt. You're not going to break the big end of the rod. Whenever we break these motors, all that part's still attached. Just the broken rod or the broken piston or those kinds of things are like not there anymore. But the rod's still hanging in there. And honestly, I think that the RPM that we've run some of these things at, these stock ones at, is way worse than doing what we've been doing with the boost. The rod, I don't think the rod bolt cares about the boost. Someone did a test of a reused bolts. They were stronger than new. I don't know how that's the case. Seasoned bolts. Yeah, the stretchy ones I don't think are ideal. Floyd's Garage. I remember they did that on the head bolts. I don't remember them doing it on the rod bolts. Yeah, Sean James is right. If you have that, the static compression is only one thing that's going to determine whether or not you can get away with running boost on that on pumped gas. You can run that compression, that static compression, but what camshaft do you have? That's going to help determine whether or not detonation is present. And then also, how much time you're going to have to strip away from it. Are you going to have to take all the timing away so that it's going to be unhappy driving it around under boost? You have to take that into consideration. Because if you think about it, there are lots of guys adding blower kits to, static compression stuff that's over 10-to-1, LS2s, LS3s, things like that, that they're adding boost to those and running them around on pump gas. And actually, the more camshaft you have in it, the more duration you have on that static compression, the easier it will be for you to run pump gas on it. We've run at West Tech, they've run NA motors that make more than 1,000 horsepower on 91 octane, high compression stuff, because they have really big cams in them. Yeah, GW2, there is a big variation in going through different zones with the type of fuel that they allow. In some of the areas that they have, like I think it's farm implement octane fuel, which is less than 87. I'm like, oh, look at that. That's cheap stuff. I'm like, wait, whoa, that's not going to be useful. Two M90s with uneven pulleys will change the pulse frequency inside the plenum. You're thinking that they will, but what if it's worse when they have the same frequency? And this makes it better. This fills in the gap in between the frequency of the other one. I don't think the frequency is something that we have to be concerned about. I think that what you have to be concerned about is one pressure wanting to backflow against the other. I don't think that that's going to be a problem. I think what you're going to see, like I said, is just the fact that you'll see if you have 10 pounds and 10 pounds going from each one of the things, then you're going to have, let's say 20 pounds. The math's not going to be that easy, but it will be for our discussion. Then you'll see 20 pounds in the motor. I think if one of them is producing 7, the other one's producing 10, I think we just have 17, let's say, or somewhere, some variable of that. I did the road trip, my Grand National. It all went well. I just had to stay out of boost. Yeah, you can put cheap gas in it if you're just cruising down the road. It doesn't care about that. If you take a cylinder which failed pressure test, it will often pass in a retest because the stretch is already taken out of it. Not a good idea to reuse them. Texas speed 240, 252, 111 on a 111. Yeah, you can get away with more of a combination of the static compression and boost with that camshaft than you could if you had a 220 camshaft. Do you think we would make more power if we left piston rings alone, running factory compression ratio and making less heat, or doing what's more common today? I don't know what you think about what is the thing that you're talking about that's more common today. If you run boost, you should add ring gap. You should have more ring gap, because if you put ring temperature in it, then and then we're talking about like running boost and racing the thing around. I don't know how you're going to leave piston rings alone and running factory compression and making less heat. I don't know. How are you going to make less heat if you have all of that? Or are you talking about NA motors? I hate low compression motors with big turbos. Yeah, that's a tough combination. And then if you have low compression motors with a big turbo and then a short runner intake manifold, then let's also throw in a camshaft that's too big. So it's just all the softness down low. And on that note, guess what? It's time to go. If you have not, please already go take a look at the video that I just posted on the M90 stuff on the 4.8 liter, 537 horsepower, big numbers. I almost got to where I wanted, just like 5 horsepower away. I think that 4.8, I think it's 5 horsepower down, at least from where it was. So we'll have to see. Next time I go down, we'll take a look at it, maybe do a disassembly and a little autopsy thing on the 4.8, and then just, hey, look, we got to switch over to either the L33 or the LC9 as our new test motor, or just go get another 4.8 or fix that one, whatever. There's all kinds of options, but we shall see. Thank you guys all for showing up, and I will see you guys all tonight. Bear.